Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Well, today's phrase is to do a double take, and that's when you notice something from the corner of your eye, but you kind of ignore it. And then when the reality sets in of what's actually happening, you immediately try to take the appropriate action. It's very common to see this in children's cartoons, for example. They kind of exaggerate it. The man is walking on the street. He sees, let's say, someone lying on the side of the road, and he doesn't think anything about it. He sees the person, and then he keeps walking, and then suddenly the gravity of the situation becomes real. And he looks back and he thinks, oh my goodness, I need to help this person. So that's doing a double take. And this is something that we talk about in England all the time when we come across a news story or an event that we just don't believe is happening. For example, I was at the airport yesterday and the queue was so long, I had to do a double take. I really couldn't believe it. I was in absolute shock about that. That's one example. Another example might be from this morning's news that RTE, that's the Irish state broadcaster, it's been discovered that they've been running a slush fund. A slush fund is when you keep an amount of money for illicit purposes. And the Irish broadcaster has been accused of running a slush fund. Executives from the broadcaster are being questioned by the Irish Parliament after it emerged substantial undeclared payments had been made to former presenter Ryan Tubridy, and some of these payments were made through some kind of slush fund which was operated by RTE. Also, through this account, they tried to say that they spent 5,000 euros buying flip-flops. It's very serious and it's being investigated. RTE is the Irish equivalent of the BBC. It's a lovely station, actually. I like the Irish station, but there isn't really much on it to watch. You can watch it, I think, with your VPN if you download the RTE player, but I don't know why anyone should be surprised about this news. Ireland and its government have been working through historic corruption issues for many, many years. I think it's because it's such a small island, and corruption has been at the heart of its government for a long time. And they're regularly kind of uncovering things. It's the same with other governments in the world, but for an English-speaking country, this perhaps is quite shocking. But it was the same here in Scotland. As I always tell you, Scottish people and Irish people, we are the same. So they recently discovered here as well that money had vanished from our government funds, and that's being investigated by an independent committee. No one's being held responsible for that yet because it's just a big amount of money that's gone. And it appeared the same time as motorhomes and luxury houses appeared for certain people. So they're currently looking into that. Some people think that the governments in the English-speaking world are not quite so corrupt as perhaps in other places. But to be honest with you, I think we just hide it better. That's all. So that's this morning's news in the BBC's headlines. about RTE. In case you're wondering what RTE stands for, like BBC is the British Broadcasting Corporation. RTE is Radio Telefís Éireann, which is the Irish Gaelic way to say radio and television of Ireland. It's the oldest state broadcaster. It goes back all the way, I think, to the 1920s when the Republic was set up. I should say that we're talking about the Republic of Ireland, not the British Principality of Northern Ireland, okay? If you like alternative media, you might like watching RTE because it's English. The accent would be broadly similar to mine. They speak fairly clear. I went to university in Dublin, so I have a very slight Irish accent. So if you have no trouble understanding me, I think you'll be okay with them. I think they do speak very clear. I mean, the Irish accent itself in the north is very, very hard and difficult. But the south is quite nice, although they're very softly spoken. It's sometimes hard to catch the words in a conversation. But yeah, it looks like they've been operating this slush fund. So they're in big trouble. I don't know what the government can do to them to punish them. I mean, it can penalize them financially. I suppose it could even shut them down. Apparently, this guy, Mr. Tubridy, received €345,000. And there's a big question mark over that. You can read the whole story on the internet. I'm sure you'll find it. But yeah, there's lots of issues about this, and there's pictures here of the staff outside RTE protesting. So yeah, I don't know how that's going to end. The BBC had a similar issue a few years ago. They also had a big issue with something related to reporting and the way that they had tricked Princess Diana into revealing personal information. And there was a big investigation. And there was never, I think, any final outcome to that. But I think it was a bit of a game changer, because I'm sure that in the coming years, the government will be looking to dismantle it or take it apart. I mean, already the government has made sure that it sees the BBC as a separate entity. It's no longer operated or owned by the government. It's not private, but the board members, only one of them is a government board member, and they don't get involved in the running. And as you can probably tell from the way the BBC reports about the British government, they really don't like each other. So I'm sure that not only because of the government's dislike of it, but I'm pretty sure that the way the world is going, this live 24-hour news streaming service will be disappearing and taken apart. In fact, last month, the BBC announced that most of it now will be coming from different parts of the world. So there's BBC World in the US, I think in Singapore as well, and the bulk of the stuff is going to be coming from there, not from the UK. Only local news at certain times. That's being implemented slowly. And to be honest with you, I'm really not surprised. I mean, to think that a small island like the UK could have and run one of the major news sources in the world, it's crazy to think that. You'd need to have different perspectives from all over the world. So that's currently changing. So yeah, all of this stuff makes me do a double take with the media, because in the past, Stations like RTE and BBC, we trusted them. They were the pillar of society. They were the mouthpiece of our nation, you know. And it's coming to light that they were, well, perhaps not as trustworthy as we thought they were. So, yeah. But if you get the chance, do have a look at RTE because it's a really good broadcaster. Some of the programs on there are a bit questionable. The quality I don't think is particularly good, but I do like RTE Radio 1 and RTE Radio 2. I was mentioning this to a student yesterday that RTE Radio 1 is very historic, you know. It holds the archive for footage from when the country was changing from British rule to Irish rule. It's always broadcasting documentaries about that, which is a wonderful thing. Very famous as well for the 6:01 news. So it doesn't have the 6 o'clock news, it has the 6:01 news. And that's because it still broadcasts the Angelus at 6 o'clock, which of course is an ancient Catholic prayer. I mean, it doesn't like the Catholic Church. The Angelus it broadcasts is kind of just a reflection of the day. It's not actually a religious thing. And the church is quite outspoken about RTE. And the RTE is very outspoken about the church, especially in these days of scandals involving the churches as well. So yeah, for such a small country, they really have their issues. And RTE was known for being one of the leading broadcasters across Europe. Yeah, so RTE Radio 1 and RTE Radio 2, if you like music, are really good stations. RTE Radio 1 has a wonderful news program in the morning time. Very nice if you want to try to listen to that. As I mentioned, accents broadly similar to mine. Both my grandmothers were Irish, so I have a little bit of an Irish accent. I was on the bus the other day and I was talking to a family member, and the lady sitting behind me, she said, "Oh, another Irish person. How lovely. Where do you come from?" And of course, there was that embarrassing moment where I thought, do I have to really admit that I'm British here? So I said, I'm local. I live locally. And she said, "Oh, sure, thought you were Irish." I said, "Well, my grandmothers were Irish, and I went to university in Dublin, and that meant we were best friends forever." The Irish are very friendly. As you know, British people, we generally don't talk to each other. At least in the cities, we largely ignore each other. But the Irish are very open and friendly. Some would say that's because of the amount of alcohol they consume. But anyway, with this lady, we were busy promising bread recipes and exchanging cakes by the end of the conversation, which is, of course, very Irish. So yeah, the culture there would be broadly similar to Scottish culture, but I did have to make a double take with this story. Yeah, very interesting, isn't it? That a trusted source of news could have a slush fund running, and that's very Irish. I mean, probably this is just the tip of the iceberg, the beginning, and the same for us. I mean, this investigation into Scottish politics and everything else. I never really liked Margaret Thatcher, but she could see very clearly that this was back in the 1980s, that there were huge chunks of the government were running funds and there was no clear accountability for where the money was going, which is why she made all the changes that she did to bring about transparency. And I think that's a good thing. But when you see that happening, you have to do a double take. What? She closed down all the business? What? She dissolved our local government? It was a bit of a shock for some people. Anyway, that's the news today about RTE, and that's our little talk about the phrase double take and RTE. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Let's talk again soon. See you. Bye.